Hi, this is Julie Harland, and I'm your Math Gal. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where you could search for any of my videos organized by topic. This is part 2 of the midpoint formula, and in this video we find the midpoint of each of these pairs of points. Alright, in the first video on the midpoint formula we discovered this formula. And so now we're going to use the formula. So we want to find the midpoint of the line segment joining each pair of points shown below. So there's 3 different problems here. So why don't you try this on your own first, put the video on pause and try it. Okay, so let's just use the formula. So for this first set of points, we know the midpoint is simply the average of the x's and the average of the y's. So we have negative 5 plus 5 over 2 and 3 plus negative 1 over 2. Remember, you're just taking the average. So what does that give me? That gives me 0 over 2 and 2 over 2, right? Which is 0, 1. So that is the midpoint. Now, if you draw a picture, that should look correct. So if you want to get out a piece of graph paper and graph negative 5, 3, plot that point, and then plot the point 5, negative 1, and then plot the point 0, 1, it should look like it's directly between those 2 points. And that's a good exercise to do to sort of convince yourself your answer makes sense. All right, let's go on to the next one. All right, so we're going to begin by taking the average of the x's. So the midpoint will be, you take the 2 x values, negative 4 plus 5, and divided by 2. And then you take the 2 y values here and add them up and divide by 2 to take their average. So that will give you negative 4 plus 5 is 1, so that gives you 1/2. 3 plus negative 8 is negative 5, so that gives you negative 5/2. And you can leave your answer like that. If you want to write negative 5/2 as negative 2.5, that's fine. Sorry. Same answer. All right, let's look at the next one. So again, we're going to take the average of the 2 x coordinates. So that will be a plus 0 over 2. And the average of the b coordinates, which is b plus b over 2. So that gives us a over 2, which is just really half of a, right? And we have 2b over 2, which is a over 2. Now, the 2's cancel, right? B. Now, one thing you might notice here is the b values right here, they're the same. And that makes sense, that if the y value is the same for both of these ordered pairs, you're going to have the same y value for the midpoint. Right, so let's say we wanted to find the midpoint of a line segment ending at those points. So let's just look at the picture. Right, so here's 4, 2, right? And then we've got 4, negative 4. Does it make sense to you if you were going to find the midpoint? So here's, that line. We're actually just looking through the line segment. That the x-coordinate's not going to change at all. It's going to be right on that vertical line still anyway. And what is this midpoint? If you could look at it, it looks like it's 4, negative 1. So notice how the x-coordinate stays the same because both of those were the same. But if we use the formula, we'll of course get exactly the same thing. 4 plus 4 over 2, that's the average of the x's. And then we take the average of the y coordinates. which is 8 over 2, and negative 2 over 2, which is 4, negative 1. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, let's do a problem where we've got to work a little bit with fractions. All right, find the midpoint of the line segment joining the point 1 1/2, negative 2/3, and 3/4. Okay, so we've got two ordered pairs here. Try this on your own first. Okay, now we know you could just write the average of the x's, 3 plus 1 1/2 over 2, and 4 plus negative 2/3 over 2. But you do have to deal with your complex fractions here, so you got to be careful. All right? So if we simplify this, we are going to get the answer. We'll have 4 1/2 divided by 2. Then we'd have to remember how to do 4 plus negative 2/3. So you could get a common denominator there. 4 is the same thing as 12 divided by 3, 12/3, minus 2/3 over 2. And then, how do I do this? 4 1/2 divided by 2. Well, there's different ways you could do this. But in general, you can see it's going to start getting messy with the fractions. So I'm going to give you another possible way to do this exact same problem. Since you see you're going to be, having these messy fractions, really you just want the average of the x's and the average of the y's. So instead of writing, it all as one ordered pair, just figure out what the x coordinate is first. And that's going to be the average of the x's. But instead of adding the two numbers divided by 2, it's really just half of 3 plus 1 1/2, okay? Hope you believe me that 3 plus 1 1/2 divided by 2 is the same thing as 3 plus 1 1/2 times 1/2. Okay, so then we have 1/2 times, all right, that's 4 1/2. And then multiplying with fractions here, we're going to just write 4 1/2 as an improper fraction. 2 times 4 plus 1, that's going to be 9/2. So the x-coordinate is going to be 9/4. I think it's a little bit easier doing this instead of trying to do it all in one ordered pair because of all the arithmetic involved. And the same thing for the y value. You're going to add the y-coordinates and then take half of it, right? Dividing by 2 is the same thing as taking half of it. So you're taking half of 4 plus negative 2/3. Now, in this case, there's a couple ways you can do this problem. You could simplify in the parentheses first, or you could do the distributive property. Sometimes when people look at problems, they decide to do it one way over the other. I'm just going to do it by adding in parentheses first, but I'll show you how you could also use the distributive property in this case. So I've got to get a common denominator here. So 4 plus negative 2/3, that's going to be 12/3 plus negative 2/3, which is 1/2 of 10/3. And I think I might be running off where you could see it. And so what would that be? Well, I could cancel the 2 into the 10. So I've got 5/3. So therefore our midpoint should be, all right, the x-coordinate was 9/4. The y-coordinate is 5/3. Or you could write that each of these as mixed numbers. That's 2 1/4, 1 2/3. So what I was saying for the second one, for the y, when you have y equals 1/2 of 4 plus negative 2/3, I was kind of just looking ahead and noticing that if I multiplied it out, I get the 2's to cancel. So I have 1/2 times 4 plus 1/2 times negative 2/3. That would give you, well, the 2 cancels into the 4. 1/2 of 4 is 2, right? And now the 2's cancel here. So you're going to get 2 plus negative 1/3. And that also is the same thing as 1 2/3. I'm not showing all the steps there, but 2 plus negative 1/3 is also 1 2/3. Or it's 5/3 if you get a common denominator. So I'm just saying how you do your arithmetic, that's up to you as long as your arithmetic is going to make sense. So if we go back to our original problem, this is fine. Starting out like this, it just gets a little bit messy with the arithmetic right here. But at this point, you might say, well, 4.5 divided by 2, what's that mean? That means 4.5 is 9/2, and divided by 2 means times the reciprocal, or 1/2. Over here, I'm going to get 10/3 in the numerator, and dividing by 2 means times 1/2. And you would still get the same answer. You would still get 9/4 here, and when you cancel, you would still get 5/3 here. So no matter how you look at it, you're going to get 9/4, 5/3. I'm just sort of working the arithmetic out in different ways for you. Oops, that would be 2 and 1/4, and 1 and 2/3. I hope I did that correct on the next page. Yes. 9/4, 5/3, or 2 1/4, 1 2/3. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where you can view all of my videos, which are organized by topic.